Hello everyone, and welcome to the Jim Kroft Podcast, where I seek to build bridges between the parallel worlds of the creative arts and the solopreneur's path. When I first started this podcast, one of the first names I wrote down as a dream guest was Josh Spector, and so I'm buzzing to speak with him today. What I love about Josh is that he combines the innovative mindset of an entrepreneur with the non-conformism of great creatives. As he says, you don't stand out by trying to fit in. Josh is a prolific solopreneur with 28 products on Gumroad, the mastermind behind the For the Interested newsletter, which boasts 42,000 subscribers, and the host of the thought-provoking I Want to Know podcast. However, what really sets Josh apart is that few people are as concentrated on giving value per minute as he is. Today, we'll gain insights into his mindset, his one-person business strategies, and his creative process from creating courses to building a newsletter to fostering a positive mindset. On a personal note, inspired by Josh's advice, I launched my first lead magnet over Christmas, leading to 170 new subscribers in my Creative Insights newsletter. It was my best week ever so far, another example of how all the ideas, insights, and actionable tips I'm learning from the guests are having a real life impact. If you'd like to go deeper, then please subscribe. You can find the link in the show notes. For all of you who are starting podcasts, newsletters, or like me, giving YouTube a shot this year, I'm really excited to continue sharing the journey ahead. Okay, it's time to meet Mr. Josh Spector. Are you ready? Then let's dive in. Mr. Josh Spector, hello.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Josh, when I started the podcast earlier this year, you were one of the very first people I reached out. You were sort of a bit of a dream guest, and so it means the world to have you here.
I appreciate it, and congrats on getting it up and running. And you've done the hard part. It's all downhill from here.
Oh man, you know what? You gave me such a good lesson the first time I reached out to you. Because first of all, I was so chuffed that you did reply, and then you gave me a great roast, which was, Jim, if you're still there in 6 months, give me a call and we can talk.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's something that I started doing, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, something like that is, I would get a lot of requests to do people's podcasts, and I wanted to come up with some sort of way of like, how do I decide like what to do, what not to do, that kind of thing. And it's really tricky because I like to sort of do as much as I can and help people as much as I can. But then also all this stuff takes time. And so I came up with this thing that basically for new podcasters, I would say to them essentially like, I don't do any podcasts that haven't been around for at least 6 months. And if you get back to me and I'll be happy to do it. And what's been interesting about it is there are definitely some people that have come back to me like you have, and I've done it, but there's a lot of people that haven't. And not because they don't still want me, but because 6 months later, they're not doing it anymore.
Right. And I really valued it. And it also kind of gave me a sort of a pump because it was like something to work for. Because I was like, I really want to speak to this man. So I really enjoyed the test. And funny enough, it's one of the questions I'd love to explore today, because how I look at you as an absolute master of how you run yourself as a business, but also with so many different things you do and with such consistency. So I think that sort of power of no is something that really would be really interesting to get to. However, to start with, I thought for the people from my side, from my audience who don't know about you, I thought maybe we could just give them a little introduction to sort of, you are a creative entrepreneur. And I thought maybe we could just give them a short overview, Josh, just to bring in the ones that don't know into play.
Sure. So basically, I help people grow their audience in business, and I do it through a few different ways. So one is I have a newsletter called For the Interested, which is literally a 1-paragraph daily newsletter. And then on Sundays, I send a longer version. Again, all tips and advice, a mix of original stuff and curated stuff to help you grow your audience in business. Very actionable stuff. Then I have a podcast called I Want to Know. The format of that podcast is it's basically like recording free consulting. So people come on, they can ask me whatever 3 questions they have about their specific situation and what they're trying to grow. I give them advice, and that's it. And then occasionally I'll do flip the script episodes where I have an expert on and I ask them the 3 questions. Then I have a product called Skill Sessions, which are a series of 1 hour video presentations on a very specific topic. So for example, I have one called the Product in a Day Creator, which is, as it sounds, how to create a product in a day. I have one called the Relationship Builder, which is about how to grow your network. I have one called the Niche Definer, which is a sort of series of exercises to help you clarify your niche, etc. If people want to check those out, they can go to joshspector.com/sessions to see those. And then the last part of my business is I work as a consultant, right? So I help people one-on-one through both one-off calls and occasionally some ongoing stuff. But it's all the same, right? It's all simplifying growth for people.
For me, when I look at your work, there's always this sense of value that you are giving. And it was a wonderful quote that I have from you, which is, you talked about being wired to others as meaning for you. And I found that it's such a powerful statement, this sense of actually being wired, and it's something about this sort of relationship and this exchange. Was that always there for you? Or where did that come from? Because I just want to talk about the meaning, because it's so easy to talk about all the whys and the do's and the rest of it. But I always get this sense that you actually just love it. And that interests me to speak with you about.
Yeah, I mean, I do genuinely want to help people. And I'm really big on providing value in everything that I do. And I also think, by the way, it's interesting because there's two pieces of this, right? There's the one piece that it feels good and I genuinely like to help people, right? But the other piece is I think it's actually smart audience and business strategy. That the way you grow an audience, the way you grow a business is by providing value to people. Right. And I always talk about value a lot, and I get asked a lot sort of how I define value. And to me, in 99.9% of cases, value is transformation, right? Someone is at point A, they want to get to point B. The value you provide through your content, your products, your services, whatever it is the bridge that gets them there. If there's no transformation, and this is a trap I see a lot of people fall into, if there's not a transformation, it's probably not valuable. It might be interesting, but it's not valuable. And I see lots of people creating things and sharing things that are interesting, and then ultimately struggling to grow an audience or grow a business, and they're confused why. And it's because that transformation piece is missing.
Damn, Josh, we are straight into the nitty gritty here, because this is one of the questions that I'm most excited to talk to you about, is the clarity of your definition between value and interest. And earlier in the year, when I was actually starting to follow your work, it's something that I really took on board. And I thought, okay, so my history is I come from the arts. I've released albums, both on independence and one on a major, pivoted into documentary. So I've always been kind of like, deep in the arts. And the motivation or the thinking or the feeling as an artist is not always specifically about value. And I don't mean this in an egocentric type of way, but one is diving into something, into an idea in oneself or spiritually or in society and the rest of it. And it's kind of like sort of what Joseph Campbell talks about, sort of following your bliss. And I suddenly thought, when I started getting more interested in solopreneurism and how entrepreneurs go about their life, in particular with the sphere of the arts, how do you as an artist or a creative pursue a career that is much more in your hands and not to do with the gatekeepers of the world? And one of the things that following you that really sort of like blew my mind, I was like, okay, I've got all of this value that I have to give. Now I suddenly felt like, okay, but I don't feel I'm being focused in actually delivering it. And so when you made this distinction about actually giving value, I started to really start adjusting it. And so I just wanted to ask you the question, when it comes to an artist who's listening to this and they're struggling and they know they're good and they know they're doing great stuff and they're pursuing their life and their career and they're fired up, but they're just not getting the audience response. What would be your advice to them about this difference between interest and value?
Well, so here's what I love. I love this, and I haven't really had a chance to sort of have this conversation specifically geared towards artists, but I think it's really an important one, because I think there's some of what you said is based on a fundamental misunderstanding or assumption that is not true, right? The creation of any piece of art is an attempt at the creation of value. Where people get
Nice.
hung up is sometimes the value they're trying to create is for themselves and not for other people. They are trying to work through, when it comes to art, their own issues. They're trying to express something they want to express. Whereas with business, it's very audience or customer focused. I'm trying to create value for them.
Mm-hmm.
With art, often we're trying to create value for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. In that case, the transformation is within you. It's internal, right? You're making this piece of art to transform yourself in some way. Totally fine. There is still value there. It's just focused on you internally as opposed to externally. Now, here's where the problem comes. The problem comes when you're creating value for yourself, you're internally focused in your art, and then you get frustrated when other people don't want it, when there's not a business. You didn't set out to create value for them. You set out to create value for yourself. Now, that may ultimately create value for others and you may be successful, but you don't have the right to assume that, I talk about this a lot of times when people ask me and they say, oh, well, I don't want to write on a certain niche or a certain topic. I want to write about whatever I feel like writing about. Right. And what I say to that is, awesome. Write about whatever you want. Write for yourself, but don't get frustrated if no one else cares. Right?
Absolutely.
You can't have it both ways.
Completely. And I think that's the thing. Also with artists, it's also not a selfish thing, but there is this assumption that because the question that they're trying to figure out in themselves, or one is trying to figure out in oneself, is such a deep and pressing question, there's sometimes an assumption that the world will get it. And that leads on to another hang up that artists often have. I'm saying artists, creators, musicians, all of us in the creative arts. And it's often we don't share the process as much as the product because we're hung up on this idea of perfectionism, which I'd like to get to in a moment. But just to kind of go on in terms of my personal experience about what I've learned from you, Josh. So for instance, at the beginning of the year, I thought, no, I believe I've got this value in my head. And rather than thinking, right, I'm just inverted commas going to put it out through artworks and songs and the rest of it, I thought, no, I'm going to really make the effort in order to start giving this out as message, as a degree of instruction. And the strangest thing happened for me was immediately when I really made the effort to consecrate these sort of abstractions into specific words, that suddenly there was a sharing of the posts that hadn't happened. Like on Instagram, where my main audiences, was sort of one that got shared about 1,000 times, which is very unusual. And the metric that I actually look at, and this is a very interesting thing for me, for any of the artist side who are actually looking, the metric people often look at is likes and shares. But actually the metric that I've learned to look at is the saved. Because if someone is saving that post, right, they are really like internalizing and you've actually reached them. So it really made a big thing in my mind, because I was like, okay, if someone's valuing it, they're saving it. But if they're interested in it, it's like, oh, that's nice. That's made me feel a bit better. They're liking it, possibly sharing it. But it's a different perspective, right?
Yeah. And I also think too, it's important to say that, in the creation of any kind of art, the chances are, even though you may be focused internally, you're not the only one that's struggling with that thing or trying to figure that out, right? So some of this is where it gets into the marketing and packaging of your art to other people. How do you convey and put it in places where the people that are struggling with that same thing or are interested in that same thing, the same transformation that you're trying to work through or think through in your art and your creations, you're not the only one dealing with that. Right. So it's important to find those people and present it and give context for your creations in a way that they understand it. And context is a big point here too. There's an interesting thing that I used to work in the movie industry, and they did studies that when they would do test screenings of stuff or show people films always score lower when you don't tell people the genre before they watch it. When you tell people the genre, it gives them context for what they're about to watch, which makes them more likely to enjoy it. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to, everyone pushes back and like, well, I don't want to just make, this, I don't want to label it a comedy or a drama, or it has all these elements of different things. And that's fine. But the way you can make what you want, but the way you present it and package it is really, really important, right? And that the
Mm-hmm,
packaging and the presentation of your art and presenting it in a way that the people who will find it valuable resonate with it is really important. And I think a lot of people don't do that. They just make a thing and throw it out there and then figure whoever sees it will see it, and that, et cetera.
So that's the thing. It's about making the effort to make the link, isn't it? And I think it's kind of quite an interesting thing, because I think sort of like historically with artists, like, where the art's come from, whoever you're looking at, sort of, whether it's in the 60s, whatever, there was this great sense of mystery, and the product was everything. Sergeant Pepper's comes out, and it's just, there's so much anticipation, the rest of it. Whereas now, of course, you put out something and it's kind of gone in a day. So actually, the sort of the build up and the process becomes so very important, I think. So what's your kind of your approach personally in that kind of sharing behind the scenes, the process, that sort of building public philosophy? What's your thoughts on that?
I tend to be, not always, but I tend to be very focused on specific value to a specific audience. So which doesn't mean there aren't things that like, oh, I just want to create that because I feel like creating that, right? But even if I have something that it's like, okay, I want to create this thing, before I actually do it, I'm going to think about, besides me, who is this for? And how is it going to help them? And why are they going to care? And how is it going to provide value? And what's the transformation? And all of those questions, right? So I'm still creating what I want to create, right? I'll never create anything just because I'm like, oh, that person would want that or find it valuable, but like, I don't really want to do it, right? That's not a recipe for success. But I'm also not just going to make something without thinking at all about who it's for, because that packaging, those little, and oftentimes they are little things, right? So I use this example, and this is sort of a random example, but it's a good example of how sort of packaging changes everything. So Lin-Manuel Miranda years ago was on Twitter, and he was posting every morning. He would have a good morning tweet, and every night he would have a good night tweet. And then he would just say whatever. Right. So it'd be good morning. It'd be your typical random celebrity tweet, have a great day today, inspiring stuff, whatever, but always good morning, good night. Right. The good morning and good night were the packaging that took regular random tweets, his creations, and made them seem more. It caught on and made him stand out on Twitter as like everyone loved, oh, Lin-Manuel's good morning and good night tweets, as opposed to every celebrity that was just tweeting equally good, interesting stuff, but without the packaging. It caught on to such an extent that he ultimately published a book of good morning and good night tweets, right? So the packaging, and got mentioned in articles, and the packaging made it unique, even though the actual creation itself was no different than what anyone else was doing. So I think that's where people also are hesitant to sort of embrace packaging their stuff or sort of the marketing side of it, because they think it's going to somehow mess it up. But basically you're just layering onto it in a way that's going to make it more compelling and accessible and help people understand. It makes it seem bigger than it is, to be honest.
Well, I think that issue, or no, that idea of presentation is something that really resonates with me, and since the beginning of the year. So I've been building up slowly a newsletter list over the years, but it was only this year that I thought, right, I really want to get deeper into this sense of value, and within that, of course, sharing my journey and my work and the rest of it, but making it much more about the exchange. And so I really got serious about consistency in my newsletter since the beginning of the year. So it comes out every Saturday, and I love it. And one of the reasons that I love it is as I've got more interested and in providing that value, it's awakened a whole new thing in my life, which is, like you said, about sort of caring about the other and the meaning. It's like, wow, okay, well, this capacity to go, right, you've got to this stage in your life, you've been through so very much in so many different ways and collected these skills, but what's the role of one's maturity as a human being? Well, I think it's that thing about saying, right, you're going to start sharing your knowledge. And the thing that I've loved about a newsletter, and this goes on to my next question, is it makes you go into the effort of packaging those ideas in that sort of coherent ways as a sort of vehicle of message. And So I'd just love to know about, for the interested, maybe you could tell people about what it is, about what the ethos is behind it, when you started it, just a little overview about your own personal newsletter before we go on to the larger role of what a newsletter can do for artists and creators.
Sure. So I started it well, first of all, I've had all sorts of newsletters over the years, that I would start and stop and whatever. I started For the Interested in 2016. So a little over 7 years ago. It was originally a weekly newsletter where I would basically curate links and summaries. The initial premise was much broader than it's become now, but it was basically, I think initially I described it as like ways to learn, do, and become better at life, art, and work, something like that. So that's like everything, right? So it was, yeah. And so it was a combination of articles and resources I found, and I would usually write an original blog post each week. So a blend of sort of original stuff and curated stuff. And published it every Sunday morning. After about 4 or 5 years, it progressively niched down as I niched down my business and became a little less self-improvement-y and much more focused specifically on audience and business growth and actionable tactics. It's interesting, in those early years, I was sharing some stuff that was just interesting. And that I no longer, now it's like, now the way I think about anything that I'm going to share is I literally look at it and I go, okay, what can someone do after they read this? And if there's not something for them to do, right, I won't share an article just about like the state of the creator economy. Because what are you going to do?
There's no wasted time with Josh Spector, right?
Right. No. So, but what I will share is like, how to write better YouTube titles or something like that, right? Something it's like, I consume this and now I can do something with it. But after about 4 or 5 years of that weekly newsletter, I do a lot of consulting and I work with a lot of people and help them with newsletters. And one of the things that I would always say to people is, I would talk, I remember very specifically, I had a comedian client and he was like, I don't want to do a newsletter. Like, I don't want to have to write a thing every week and do the whole thing. And I remember saying to him, and I would say this to lots of people, I was like, there's a lot of assumptions about what a newsletter has to be that are incorrect. All it is a value delivery mechanism. And I remember saying to him, your quote unquote newsletter could be one paragraph a week that you send to people and you say, hey, here's a funny video I found on YouTube, and people think you're funny and they're curious to know what you think's funny and they would love it. And it would be simple. Right. So, and I would always say that. And I would say like, and to be honest with you, it being that short, it'd probably work even better than a longer newsletter because everyone's busy and everybody's whatever. Right. After saying that over and over again, I was like, well, I've been saying this like it's fact. Maybe I should actually test it. So I started a side newsletter called The Daily Graph. And the idea was one paragraph a day, basically a paragraph and a link. Sometimes it was only a sentence, and people loved it. And so then I collapsed that into my For the Interested newsletter. And so now For the Interested is every weekday. I send literally a one paragraph, sometimes one sentence newsletter. And then on Sundays, I send a longer one that has 5 curated things. But yeah, so that's sort of a crash course in my newsletter.
Well, I love the way that you have this sort of revolutionary mindset, if you like, because you're always flipping the norm somehow. That's something that I really enjoy about following your work, both on the podcast and newsletter. So I thought I'd just drop in a revolutionary quote and just get your reaction to it for fun, Josh. So this is Rosa Luxemburg, and she said, freedom is always the freedom of the one who thinks differently. So how does Josh Spector go about the process of thinking differently?
So it's a great question. I think there are two things here. So one is just across sort of everything I create and a sort of fundamental belief that I have, which is you don't stand out by trying to fit in. So the first thing is, I feel like everyone looks at something, and this isn't just in the creator world, this is everywhere, right? They look at something that's successful and then they go run to copy it. but almost anything that's successful and breaks out does so because it's different. So they always take the wrong lesson. Right. The lesson is actually that thing popped because they zagged when everyone else was zigging. Right. The lesson is not go do exactly what they were doing. Right. So that's the first thing. I believe unique is a competitive advantage. So I'm always trying to do whatever I'm doing, try to do it a little differently. The second thing is one of the ways to do that is I'm a huge believer in the importance of format and unique format. So almost everything I've created, right? So for example, my newsletter, there's a million newsletters that share curated stuff about, audience and business growth and et cetera, right? So what can I do with a format that's different, right? There's not a million newsletters that are one paragraph, one sentence newsletters, right? So immediately it stands out. When I decided to launch a podcast, the obvious thing is have guests on, interview them, do the usual thing, right? I said, no, I'm going to have people on ask me questions. I'm going to have it be only, and again, this is where this goes back into the packaging, right? So is there a difference besides people interviewing me, right? Is there a difference between that and a typical interview show? Like, no, but by saying I'm only going to have 3 questions, suddenly it's different. Right. So formats and so both of those things, right? So the importance of being unique, the importance of using format as a way to be unique. And then I think the third thing is my overall goal with everything I do is how can I give people as much value per minute? I'm always trying to be concise. I'm always trying to condense things, and I'm always looking at things and going, well, this, one of my biggest pet peeves when I would listen to podcasts is you'd have some expert on, let's say they're a marketing expert, and you're tuning in to listen to their advice. At least I am. I'm tuning in to listen to their advice on marketing for them to tell me what to do. It'll be, let's say, a 1-hour show. And the first 25 minutes is them talking about their background and what they did in kindergarten. And I'm like, I don't care about that. So when I launched the podcast, I was like, I only want it to be like, literally my podcast intros are like maybe a minute. I have a 3-second description of who the guest is. And I go, what's your first question? And we get into it. Right. So that's another thing yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I find it amazing how you do that because it's really masterful in your podcast. So first of all, I love the format, people coming in. The reason I love it is because it's always fresh because people have slightly different variations or iterations of different types of things, and they're coming from different industries. So it keeps it fresh. So I really recommend everyone to check out Josh's podcast. And the other thing is you're so good at keeping the conversation moving, and it's almost like instructional. Like it's like, right, next question, and we move on to it. And this is something that I think that certainly I struggle with, and a lot of artists struggle with. It's this kind of capacity or tendency to be too long-winded. And you have this amazing capacity to be really short, focused to the point in everything you do. And so at what point did you realize that? Because I mean, say for instance, with newsletters, right? I love to write the newsletter, but very often in a week, I'll be enjoying it, but suddenly it will be going on and on. I'll be like, man, you're going on, and sure, you're really into it, and there's loads of ideas, and it's fun and enjoyable. But it's like you've got to do the rest of the society of the things that you have to do. So when it comes to this kind of sense of brevity and moving life along, which you are such a master at, what are your sort of like 3 tips that you would give to people about a philosophy of moving their day along and including a habit or 2, just a little bit of advice about how you do that?
So I think before I jump into that, I think there's one thing that's important to say here, right? There is no one quote unquote right way to do this, right? So what it's about is about alignment and understanding what you're optimizing for, right? So I've chosen to optimize for value per minute, for quick, concise, sort of minimalistic, simple, like let's get in, let's get out, let's get people moving with their day, right? That's a choice. The truth is I could go in the opposite direction right?
Sure.
And I could write long and have 3-hour podcast episodes and have leisurely conversations and backstories and all that kind of stuff. One is not necessarily better than the other, right? But what you want to do is you want to make a choice and message that choice so that you're attracting the people that want that thing. Right. Lots of people, I sit here and I go, I don't like when people spend, 20 minutes talking about someone's backstory, like just get to the stuff. But lots of people love that. Right. That's fine. There are different shows for them. So I think the first thing is understanding what is it that you're actually optimizing for. So if you do want to sort of go my model and optimize for brevity and conciseness and all of that kind of stuff, you need to be clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish with whatever you're creating and doing. A lot of times that meandering is they're not sure where they're going or what they're doing, right? They're like, we're going to just find it, which is fine. And that can lead to some cool and interesting things. But for example, on my show, when I have a guest on, and by the way, if anyone wants to come on my show, you can apply at joshspector.com/questions and they submit their questions. So I'm not getting on the show and I know what they're going to ask. And I've already thought through what my answers are going to be. I don't know all the details and we're still going to explore stuff and stuff is going to come out, but I know where I'm going. Right. And I also know in my own mind that like, okay, there's going to be 3 questions. We're going to spend roughly 10 minutes on each of them. That's what this show is going to be. Now, sometimes some episodes are 35 minutes and some episodes are 60 minutes, right? Like it does vary. There is room in there to go different places, but there's a level of sort of preparation, but also intention. And I think if you don't have an intention for what you're trying to do, it makes it really hard to sort of be concise and be whatever. The other thing is when you create something, if you're looking to sort of tighten it up, first of all, I have a lot of experience in this. I studied journalism in college. I worked in the comedy industry. If you think about stand-up, that's all about sort of precision of words. I was a huge fan of hip hop music forever. That's all about precision of words. So I don't think it's coincidence. When I look at journalism, comedy, and rap music, I don't think it's a coincidence that my style is very condensed, packed in, approach to it. Right. So all of those things sort of play into it. But the other thing is everything can be reduced. So my favorite writing tip is whatever you write, when you think you're done, you've edited it, you're ready to hit publish, do a word count. And now go force yourself to delete at least 10% and ideally 20% of the words. I guarantee you it's the simplest writing tip because every single person can do it, whether you've written something long or short or whatever you've written, whether it's a speech or an article or a newsletter or whatever it is, right? But what happens is the way most of us edit our work is you write something, you're editing it, and with each thing you're asking yourself, is this good? Do I need it? And your bias is always going to go to, yes, that's why you put it in there in the first place. But when you flip it and go, I have to delete X amount of words. Now you're not asking, is it good? Now you're asking, what is the least good of what's in here? And it makes it much easier to eliminate stuff. And again, I do it with everything I write. And I'm still to this day, even though I know it works, every time you're shocked because you're like, wow, I thought this was really concise, but now it's better.
I had Jay Klaus on the podcast and he talks about this very much as well. And his podcast is, it's very, very masterful. And he does a lot of editing with it. He really squeezes the format and, similar to your podcast, usually between sort of 40, 50 minutes, sometimes a bit shorter. And it's a wonderful format. And that's something I really enjoy. But just to move on from that into this, a couple of different directions I'd love to jump in. So first of all, in terms of when you are creating something, there's a great quotation. This is about publishing, it's about consistency, and it's about getting stuff out, right? So something that I read from you is if I'm going to do a blog for 2 hours, I'm going to hit publish and I'm going to iterate afterwards. And I found this sort of very interesting as something that I've discovered as I've got more interested in the entrepreneurial and the hacking world and the coding world and the business world and the solopreneur world, is just being sort of very tactical towards a deadline. And I'm going to create this and then I'm going to damn well ship it come what may. And this is, of course, there are artists out there who do this, but it's a pretty sort of, it's not really a way of an approach that artists have. I think that the Beatles were so productive because they had the pressure from the record company that they just had to be getting out. And I think that's one of the pressures that made them such a great band. And so I just wanted to kind of get a little bit more, because you're so consistent in your publishing, but I feel that there's a secret behind your capacity to be so disciplined with that scheduling, and it's perhaps not being over perfectionist. And I wonder what your sort of philosophy in terms of shipping something, getting something made, and then getting something out is.
Yeah, I love this. I love this topic because I also think it is something that lots of people struggle with. And I have a few different sort of thoughts about this. So the first is, I think that lots of artists tend to think that constraints inhibit creativity. And I actually strongly believe that constraints enable creativity. So for example, what stalls people out is the sort of, everyone thinks they want this creative freedom. They don't want to be in a box, but my advice is that you should draw your own box, right? That is actually the key to being more creative and being more productive as a creator. So a few examples of this, right? So one thing is, if I hand you a piece of paper and say, draw something, it's sort of paralyzing. If I hand you a piece of paper and say, even if whether you're an artist or not, if I hand you a piece of paper and say, draw something, it takes a second, right? If I hand you a piece of paper and say, draw a cat, you've started drawing right away. Right. So that's the idea of like, okay, how can I create a box for myself? Another quick example here, or story. Lorne Michaels, one of my favorite quotes is, he says, Saturday Night Live doesn't go on because it's ready. It goes on because it's Saturday night at 11:30. Right. Like it's your art, your creation is never going to be ready. And once you understand that, right. And it can always be improved and tweaked and whatever. Once you understand that, it becomes easier to ship. Right.
Yes.
There's the Lorne Michaels thing. So I'm a big believer in giving yourself those deadlines. And the other thing that helps you do this is because perfectionism obviously gets in the way, right?
Right.
And I think it's really important to understand and wrap your head around and truly get to a place where you truly believe and understand and absorb with every bone in your body that perfect does not exist. Right. Especially in art. Perfect for who, perfect for what, there's no such thing. So once you truly understand and believe that perfect doesn't exist, it allows you to go, well, what am I doing? Right? Why am I'm sitting here and I'm tinkering and I'm whatever, and I'm chasing this, but perfect doesn't exist anyway. So, and then one last thing that from Rick Rubin, who's another sort of like idol of mine. And it's interesting when we were talking before about sort of the minimalism and all that kind of stuff and reducing, on those early albums, they didn't say produced by Rick Rubin, they say reduced by Rick Rubin. He is a perfect example of sort of the reduction of stuff, but he has something, he's worked with so many incredible artists, and he would say he often works with artists who get to this point where they're forever tinkering with the song. They have problems shipping, right? They're trying to, it can always be better. It can this, that, or the other. And he tells this story where he would bring an artist in and he would say to them, look, we've been working on this a long time. We've tried a million things. It's never going to get better. We've reached the point where it's never going to get better. It's just going to get different. So we can keep tweaking and we can keep doing things. But again, this is a different version of perfection doesn't exist, but you're no longer improving this thing. You're just making it different. So let's pick one, let's put it out, and let's move on. And I think there was, along with that story, I forget exactly what artist it was, but he, they'd been working on something forever. And the guy came in the next day to work on it, and he sat down with him, I think in the morning, and said, we're finishing this song today. We can do whatever we want all day. At the end of the day, it's over. Wherever we are, and then we're moving on. And I think that's, those are all, it's being intentional about it, right? You have to want to do it in order to do it.
I love this idea that there's a freedom in the act of shipping as well, because one of the reasons we don't release stuff is because we're hoarding and things get more and more and more, and then the idea of perfection gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So when it comes to an artist who's struggling to ship something, or even during the day, let's talk about 3 Josh Spector tips about how they should use the act of shipping on a daily basis in order to free themselves towards actually getting to that artistic vision. Let's, call it the album or the finished painting or the course you're creating if you're a solopreneur or whatever it is. What would be your 3 actionable tips about how to go about that in the day?
So the first one would be to understand that shipping is not the end, that shipping is a step in the process, right? Now, it's a step in the process towards another creation. It's a step in the process of that creation. Just because you put it out doesn't mean you're done with it. There's still promotion, there's still marketing, there's still a million different things. Yeah. It's a step in your bigger journey, right? There's things you've learned from that and from the shipping of it that influence the next thing. I think a lot of what holds people back from shipping is that fear of it feels like an end, and understanding okay, it's not an end. The second tip I would say to ship more regularly is to get in the habit of shipping. Right. The more often you ship, the more comfortable you become shipping. Right? Can you create something where, as opposed to okay, I take these long times making something, and let's say it's an album, right? You're not going to make an album in a day. You could, but you're most likely not going to make an album in a day. Yeah. Okay. But could you create a riff a day that you put out on social media? Right? Yep. Is there a micro thing? Could you do something so you're just in the habit of putting something in the world on a frequent basis, so that when it comes time to release the album or release the book or release the whatever, you're not sitting there going, I haven't released anything in a year and a half. And now it seems like there's a lot of pressure on this thing, right? It's a muscle. Shipping is a muscle, and you need to practice it, and you need to work it out. And then the last thing I would say to get better with shipping is, a lot of what holds people back from shipping is obviously a fear of failure and a fear of rejection. So develop that muscle, right? And I forget what it was. Maybe a TED Talk. I think it was maybe a TED Talk, but there's a video where a guy talks about, he set a goal for a number of rejections. And he wanted to be rejected every day. And he literally just made this list of things. But what he was actually doing was trying to get more comfortable with rejection so that he wouldn't be scared.
It was at the restaurant, right? He would go and see.
Yeah, well, Noah Kagan's done that. He would ask for discounts all the time. But it's really powerful, right? And I think with all 3 of these tips, the underlying piece of it is to identify what is holding you back from shipping. And sort of desensitize yourself to those things. Find other ways to sort of build the muscle of shipping. And I guess I'll give one last one too. The last one I would say is to understand that when you don't ship because you're afraid of failing, all you're doing is guaranteeing your failure. You're removing any chance of success by not shipping, right? So the only guaranteed way to fail is to not ship it. So I think once you realize that, you can maybe sort of spin it and invert your mind games on themselves in some weird inception way.
I love it, Josh. You know what I love about speaking with you on the podcast is that, I'd often feel like I'm really putting someone on a point and I'm saying, right, give me 3 actionable tips, Josh. It'd be like, okay, that's not such a cool move. With you, you're just like straight down into the nitty gritty. So like so much respect. And one of the things, so it's really interesting. So today I did your new course, the Solopreneur Simplifier. Congratulations.
Thank
Brilliant
you.
course. And I loved it because it's like, right, $25. Bought it, 1 hour packed full of value, just so much helpful stuff. One of my pain points, Josh, is that I'm a musician historically. I'm still a musician, but I was full-time for years. And then I pivoted because money was tough into film and photography, built up a freelance business, gone very well. Oh, I got to give you this bit of news, man. Rolling Stone wrote to me today and they said, you got to come down and do a video of Bryan Adams. I'm going to be in a room with Bryan Adams. So I just,
nice.
Just
cool.
as a little claim to fame, right? Yeah, it's really fun. But the funny thing is, Josh, when I got the mail, it's so funny how the world speaks. I was like, I was going, right, next year I'm taking less work because I really want to focus on making a business, including putting out more of my own artwork together. But especially one of the things I want to do is create my first digital course. So I went onto your courses and I got it. And I was just, because I've had this on my mind all year to make this damn digital course. And I went onto your site and I was like, Josh has got 28 different courses on Gumroad. And then I downloaded it and I was like, wow, I so admired the fact that there was no frill, there was no fluff. It was just Josh and value. And you just gave it away in an hour. And I thought, wow, that is such a lesson to ship because I've got all the cameras. I know I've got the knowledge. I'm struggling with time, but you've always can make the time. So for me, actually, just that was a real actionable lesson, just simply going, this is how you do it. That's how you become an entrepreneur. It's that capacity for action, right?
Yeah. And I think also people, it's so easy to overcomplicate things. And they think, it's funny. I've talked to people about creating different types of products to sell to their audience or whatever, their expertise. And, they think whether it's a course or some sort of product they think it needs to be this elaborate big thing. Right. And I remember talking to someone once and I was like, look, you have expertise about this subject. Here's your course. Here's your product. Pick someone to interview you, get on Zoom, let them interview you and pull out all the knowledge that you have on this subject. Get really specific. Don't talk generalities. Don't say like, you need to get more engagement on social media. Like talk about exactly how to do it. Stop the record button at an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever. You don't need to edit any of it. You've just done your course. Upload it to a sales page, to Gumroad, whatever, and sell it. You created your whole course in an hour, 2 hours, whatever, in live real time. You don't need a camera crew. You don't need you don't need 8 different modules, 30 different worksheets. Like no one wants that anyway. Like what matters is the value of the information, right? And I'm not saying that that's like, you can't do those other things. That's fine too. Yeah. But I think people get so hung up of like, the hard part is the knowledge, the expertise, that kind of stuff, right? Again, the rest is just the packaging. And ultimately, it's funny. I talk about this even with free content and social media content. If you take something like Instagram, people would get obsessed with pretty pictures and all of this kind of stuff, right? And I was like, the thing that makes a post work is on any platform is the underlying idea.
Right.
I've had posts, some of the most successful posts I've ever posted, not just for me, but for clients. I used to run digital media for the Academy of Motion Pictures and the Oscars. Some of the most successful posts were literally like a photo of a Post-it note with something written on it.
Crazy.
Because it's the underlying message that drives the value of that is what drives the success. And it's the same thing with any product, right? And you see people get too focused on the other. Because by the way, the most highly produced, amazing course ever isn't going to work if the information in it isn't valuable.
Right. Right.
Or another example of this is with newsletters, right? I get asked all the time, what platform should I use for my newsletter? Should I use Substack? Should I use ConvertKit? Should I use Beehive? Should I use whatever? And my answer is always, that is the single least important decision and factor in the success of your newsletter.
When it comes to podcasts, okay, so with like a podcast, for instance, just pivoting on into that, because I know that we've got limited time, and I'm enjoying so much, and there's so many things I want to ask you. So with podcasts, for instance, going back to this sense with time and how you deal with it. So if you're doing a flip the switch podcast, how do you do your research, Josh? Because for instance, you had a wonderful podcast with Danny Miranda, and one of the things that I really love that Danny said, I did this really weak podcast where I just didn't do enough research, and I thought I could just wing it, and I just completely found out that was early. And then later on, he did far too much for another podcast, and he found it was totally not in the moment. And of course, you want to do your research for someone who's coming on, the rest of it. So for me, it's like I do go in deep because it matters a lot to me. But for you, what is your process? Like, do you give yourself like, right, I'm going to research this for 2 hours and then free form it? Or what's exactly your approach with those flip the switch?
So the first thing is going back to what I said, constraints, right? My podcast is 3 questions. So I know I only got to come up with 3 questions, right? So that's the first thing, right? I know I'm not going to, go ahead.
But including a flip the switch. So when Danny comes on, are you still?
I'm asking him 3 questions. Now there will be follow-ups, right? There will be follow-ups within our conversation, but I know I'm only going to ask him 3 questions. Just like they send me the questions in advance, I'm going to send him the questions in advance. Which, by the way, there is something to the free form element of it. I had no idea what you're going to ask me, and that leads to interesting things. But there's a reason. For example, most Hollywood productions, like when you go on a talk show, they know ahead of time what's going to be talked about, right? So when I have the questions in advance and people are asking me questions, it allows me, ultimately it's about the end product. So if I have some time to think about it, I can come up with better answers and examples. And I find the same thing with a guest, right? If I tell them what they're going to, again, but this is for what I'm producing. I'm not saying by any means that you should always send everyone the questions. The second thing is, I know that my goal is always actionable advice, right? So I know that whatever the questions are that I ask them, I want to set them up to give answers that someone's going to be able to do something with. So I'm not going to, because again, that's the premise that I'm going for. So I'm not going to ask them, what's your opinion of this? I'm going to ask them, how do you do this, right? How should someone do this? So for example, I'm going to have on a Flip the Script episode, Brennan Dunn, who is an expert in email segmentation and automation and that kind of stuff. So first of all, I'm booking people that I'm familiar with. So I know, it's not like I know a bit about him. So I'm not going and doing any really extensive research because I don't really need to, because my goal is to get advice from him on how to do stuff. The beginner mindset actually helps me, right? So, for example, the questions I'm planning to ask him, the first one is going to be something along the lines of this. So I say, obviously, there's a ton of cool stuff you can do with segmentation and automations, but I think people often get intimidated by that. So I'd like to start with an incredibly simple approach. Let's say someone has a newsletter and they're going to send a 3-email welcome sequence to new subscribers. What would you recommend they do with each of those 3 emails, and when should they schedule them to send? There's no way that answer isn't actionable. Right? Yeah. Because the question draws out an actionable answer. The other thing you'll notice is the level of specificity. Give me, there's going to be 3 emails in the sequence. What should each of them be? I don't just say, hey, what should they do with their welcome sequence? Right? Because I want to make sure that I'm getting specific advice and not a general, like, well, welcome sequences should be this or that. Like, what are the 3 things? So that's question 1. Question 2 is, when it comes to segmentation, your segments are only as valuable as the information you use to create them. What do you think are the 3 most valuable data points to get on your readers? And what's the best way to go about getting that data? Right? Super specific. He's going to have to name 3 things. And not only that, going that layer deeper of like, not just what should you get, but how do you actually get it?
Well, thanks, Josh. And I think the big takeaways for me is 1, using limitation, 2, being very specific, but also trusting yourself, right? Because you are trusting yourself that you, as you are feeling relaxed, you're going to go into it and you're going to keep it moving. Just going back to putting one's message out into the world as an artist or as a solopreneur with a newsletter. If someone's not using a newsletter, what are 3 reasons why a musician or an artist, solopreneur should be using a newsletter and embracing this as something that they're just missing out on? What are the reasons?
So the first is it's the single strongest connection you can have to your audience. And what that means is even the social platforms know this. That's why they want to send you email notifications all the time. If they believe that it was easier to reach you on social, wouldn't they just do that?
Yeah.
The truth is your social followers, if you're lucky, you're going to get 10% organic reach. So most of your social followers are not seeing anything you're posting. If you have a decent email list, you can, certainly realistically get a 50% open rate. So that's a massive difference. To be honest, my podcast, by far the biggest driver of downloads and views to my podcast is my newsletter. It's just the best way to reach people. So that's the first reason. The second reason would be it's a platform you own. So you're not at the mercy of social platforms whose algorithms can change, who can go away, who can whatever, right? That's a super powerful asset. And then let's see, the third reason I would say is maybe just the flexibility, right? You can do whatever you want. Again, it's a value delivery mechanism. So you want to send a video, send a video. You want to send an image, send an image. You want to send a link, send a link. Whereas these social platforms, their algorithms, you can post links on social, but the algorithms aren't going to show them to anybody. Right. So that flexibility is really powerful. You don't have to feel constrained or make choices based on what the algorithm wants. You can do what you want.
Do you see it as an act of faith and commitment in your own career? Because let's say you're about to get started and you're like, oh, I've only got 4 subscribers. But it's like, if you're serious about what you do, is it not about saying, right, okay, I've got 10 years ahead, I've got 20, I've got 40 years ahead for my career. And it's like, I will just do this as a consistency. So if someone is on the fence, they're like, well, I'd like to do it, but yeah, it's great for Josh. He's got 50,000 subscribers. What's your argument to that person with the 4 subscribers about why to stick in the game?
Well, it's not going to grow if you don't start and stick in the game. First of all, the other thing that I would say is to understand that, everybody starts from 0. You don't get 1,000 subscribers. You get 1 subscriber 1,000 times, which is a really important mindset. I think a lot of people are looking for this sort of mass thing, and that's not how it works. The other thing that I didn't mention before that I think is really important and why people should have newsletters is email is a intimate and two-way platform, unlike social. So on social, everything that you post, no matter what it is also the person that's seeing it in their feed is also being influenced by how many likes does it have? How many comments does it have? Did other people say this sucks? Whereas in their inbox, they're one-on-one with your content. They're making up their own mind whether or not they think it's good and interesting.
Yeah.
Also, when they reply to you, they don't have to reply to you. It's not everyone else seeing it. So you will find that the replies and the interactions you get over email, like I said, are much more intimate and much more valuable. It's it's even though it's one-to-many, it feels like a one-to-one platform. And I'm amazed at times where I'll send an email to my whole list and I'll get replies from people who genuinely feel like and act like I just sent it to them. And I'll be taken aback sometimes because I'm like, do they really think that like they're the only one that got this? But I think it speaks to that relationship. Whereas on social media, unless you're doing a direct message, which is a whole other thing, in your social media post, everybody knows you're broadcasting to everyone. And it doesn't feel, they know if they're going to reply or say something to you, everyone else is going to see it. It's a totally different dynamic. And I think most artists like the idea of a closer connection and relatively sort of intimate relationship with their audience. And email allows that in a much better way than social.
So I've started it. What are my 3 levers for actually growing the damn thing?
One is you need to get clear on the specific value and the specific audience it's for. And your messaging on your sign up page, when you talk about it, when you promote it, needs to reflect that. It can't just be, hey, get the Jim newsletter and see what I have to talk about. Right. It's like, it's funny. You'll see a lot of sign up pages where the description of the newsletter is what the newsletter is, as opposed to what the value is. So it's not, oh, I share links to this. It's I share, I'm giving you stuff. The result of them getting the information from you, what's the benefit, right? How's it going to help people, right? I don't say, oh, I share links about whatever. I say, it's going to help you grow your audience and business, right? So that's really important. And this gets back to sort of the packaging thing. The second thing is cross promotions with getting in front of other people's audiences. Is really, really helpful. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's, recommendation programs within a lot of these email platforms now, but also just manual outreach to people that have a similar audience. And by the way, it doesn't have to be newsletter to newsletter. So you could say, oh, this person has an Instagram. Let's say you have a podcast, and let's say that person has an Instagram following, and you go to them and say, hey, I'll mention your Instagram on my podcast. Would you mention my podcast on your Instagram or, whatever, my newsletter, right? Great. So that's a huge way to do it. And then the third is, I know it sounds sort of trite, but consistency. Like newsletters, it's a long game. It's not it's not a like, oh, you're going to go viral and whatever. And the other thing I would say too with that is it really you need to push people, not push them, but you need anyone who discovers your content, discovers your thing. You need to nudge them towards your newsletter. You want it to really be the sort of central hub of your audience. And if you're not talking about it, if you're not mentioning it, if you're not giving them a reason to sign up for it, like here's a very simple thing that you could do, right? You could, in your newsletter, always include an excerpt from a clip from the podcast that wasn't on the podcast. Which would then mean in every podcast, you could go sign up for my newsletter to get the bonus clip of the week or whatever. Lovely. You're giving them a reason to do so, as opposed to what a lot of podcasters do, which is like, sign up to my newsletter and I'll send you when the new episode comes out. And people are like, well, I'm already subscribed in Apple. Like, what do I need that for? Right. So you need to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're giving people an incentive and a reason to subscribe, as opposed to, because otherwise it's like, why would they, right? What's in it for them?
Thank you, Josh. So look, I've just got 3 final questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? So the first is just to I'd love to get your perspective on Twitter, where it's at. I'll whack the questions into one. How has your Twitter journey been? Secondly, what's your sense about where Twitter's at? Are you seeing the engagement being similar to as it was before Elon Musk came in, or has it changed a little bit? And thirdly, what's the future of where you think it's going?
I love Twitter. I'm a big fan of it in general. I've used it for years. It's by far my favorite social platform. I have always felt that, besides the fact that I like writing, I have always felt that Twitter is really an ideas platform. Whereas other platforms, Instagram's more image and et cetera. So I'm a big fan of it. I'm not a fan of any of the Elon stuff. I'm not a huge fan of the direction it's going. That has not led me to abandon the platform, because I also think Twitter, just like all these platforms, they are what you make of them. So you control who you let into your feed. So if you're seeing poison and you're seeing terrible stuff, that's on you, not the platform. So even though I'm not a fan of the direction, I'm by no means am I bailing on it.
Sure.
And I think ultimately it's a work in progress. I wouldn't say it's better than it was by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some things that, I like. Long form tweets is a nice feature to have. So, my experience on the platform, even though I think overall it's not headed in a great direction and disagree with a lot of sort of the way they've done things, it is not, I still get a ton of value from it. My feed is still great because I follow people that are great and sharing stuff, and I get a lot of interaction there and all of that. So it's a mixed bag. And I think it is, I don't know where it's ultimately all headed. I think, from a business standpoint, I think it's a bit of a disaster and it's not going to
Mhm.
have a happy ending for Elon.
Oh, right. Okay.
But from a user perspective, I have started using LinkedIn more than I used to. So I guess in some ways that's a bit of a check on, we'll see what happens with Twitter. But at the end of the day, this is where it goes back to newsletter and email list. I'm not worried about losing my audience because I can email whatever I want to use. Like I have a direct connection to my audience. So I don't feel vulnerable in that way.
And so pivoting on to my second final question, when you are waking up and you're having a shocker of the day, you know, those days that we all have where it's just not happening for you. And even that capacity, you know, you're not feeling connected to that capacity to create or to ship. What are your mechanisms, you know, if you're having a rough ride on a particular day, just something maybe you could share for someone who might be having a bit of a difficult one as winter kicks in?
I would say that, you know, I work for myself, so my schedule is largely my own. So I don't put too much pressure on myself. You know, if I'm not feeling it, I'm not feeling it, and that's okay. You know, I don't, you know, I work every day and work a relatively normal schedule. You know, I'll do my newsletter on Saturdays. I'll, you know, some days not really work much in the afternoon. Like, so I can sort of, you know, I'm able to sort of play with it in that way. The other thing I would say is when I am feeling sort of stretched all over the place or overwhelmed, I will really try to narrow in and simplify and focus. Right. So I will, as opposed to looking at this whole to-do list of things, I'll literally start a separate thing and be like, I'm put 3 things on it and I'm doing these 3 things in this order. And that's it. And then when I do those, then I'll worry about everything else. Right. So trying to sort of just narrow in and focus and understand like, okay, if I don't feel like I can write something now, well then, okay, I'll do something else now. Right. I'll, whatever it is, go through emails or, you know, do something else. So I just kind of adjust as it goes. And yeah.
Beautiful words, Josh, especially because you're so consistent, but it's also lovely to hear that you use that sort of philosophy of limitation. Even on a bad day, you'll keep yourself going by taking that philosophy of limitation and just, you know, keeping the wheel moving. So my last question, there's a struggling artist or musician or someone with a one-person business out there, perhaps feeling a little bit overwhelmed with everything, doubting themselves. What would Josh Spector's message of encouragement, something just to give them a bit of fire and a bit of keeping on going, what would you say to them?
It's funny because it depends a bit on what they're struggling with, but
of course.
I would say, I mean, a couple different things here, I guess. So the first is, you know, I think in general, not enough people do things. So they talk about doing things, they think about doing things, they come up with excuses not to do things. So the first thing I would say is like, do things. Like if what's holding you back is you're like, I feel like this isn't working or I'm failing or whatever, I can't do this or whatever, like just shrink it down, simplify it, start to take steps in that direction that actually involve doing. Right. Because a lot of times I think people feel stuck and it's like, well, you're stuck because you're not actually doing anything. Right. So like, even if it's small, like I said, right. If you're stuck and you're like, oh, I can't write a song. Okay. Well, can you do a riff and put it out there? Like, you know, so I think that's the first thing I would say is you need to do things. The other thing I would say is I think that, you know, failures are really more valuable than people realize. Because what I think is the actual most dangerous thing is a sort of stagnant state. So if you're thinking about doing a podcast or writing a book or doing whatever, right? The problem is not doing that thing and not working, or you even trying to do it and being like, oh, I don't really want to do this. Because if that happens, you have learned valuable information because now you can remove it and go, you know what? I thought I wanted to write a book. I don't actually want to write a book. So I can put that aside. When you don't actually pursue it, when you don't go to the failure part or try to do the thing, it's forever just taking up space and it's preventing you from moving on and doing other things. right? Having jobs, having opportunities, having anything that you pursue and it doesn't work out or you hate it or you don't like it or whatever, right? Getting that information of going, oh, you know what? I thought I wanted that. It turns out I don't want that is really valuable. And I think that can be really helpful. Like, maybe you're stuck for a reason, and maybe that reason is you don't actually want to do that thing. Right. I mean, there was a time in my life where I actually left my job to become a screenwriter. I wanted to be a screenwriter. And I was doing it and I was making some progress and I was writing scripts and this and that, but it was a real struggle. Like I had to force myself to write. And then I started getting into social media and all that kind of stuff. And I had to pull myself away from working on that. And I was like, it became very clear to me of like, well, wait a second, maybe the reason why I'm struggling so hard with the screenwriting thing is I don't actually want to do that. Right. Maybe what I want to do is the thing, maybe I should lean into the thing that I'm doing with all my free time and have trouble getting away from the computer, as opposed to the thing that I have trouble forcing myself to sit down and do. People get caught up in what they can be successful at. And this is very true of people that are talented and multi-skilled and whatever, right? They go, oh, I could do this. That they forget, they see all these opportunities. They forget that like, maybe you don't actually want to do that. I have no doubt to this day, and maybe this is my own ego or whatever, but like, I have no doubt to this day that I could become a successful screenwriter if I wanted to. But I don't actually want to do that. Right? And I think you shouldn't have to like fight yourself to do it. Like maybe the answer is, maybe the reason you're stuck is because you don't actually want to do that. And that's fine. Go find, what is coming easy to you? What do you want to spend your time on? Like go lean into that as opposed to just trying to sort of beat your head against the wall. Yeah. But by the way, sometimes things are hard. So just because it's hard doesn't mean like, I'm not saying like, oh, just bail on anything, but you have to sort of find that in there. And it's like, are you in a bad place because it's hard and you're impatient and it takes a lot of time? Or are you in a bad place because you're pursuing a thing that maybe you thought you wanted to do that you don't actually want to do anymore? And you just won't give yourself permission to move on.
But it's a beautiful message of just listening to yourself first. Yeah. Josh Spector, thank you so very much. I'm just mind blown, and there's so much that I personally will take away from this and go back to, and it's just a pleasure to meet you as well.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much. I'm glad you stuck with it for 6 months so we could have so we could have this conversation.
Dude, I'm coming back for you for a follow-up in a couple of years.
All right.
See you later, Josh. Take care, my friend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.